to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 114. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
But that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today, we're talking to Ray. Ray is like every other American who was born in the Philippines and then grew up in Turkey and has lived in Mexico for the last 12 years that you know. He was born traveling and still loves it today. And when he's not traveling, he builds 6- and 7-figure online businesses from his home in Mexico in his Superman pajamas. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you. And I really do own Superman pajamas. People just think I just say that, but no, my wife will tell you I own multiple sets of Superman pajamas.
I
and
love
one Green
that.
Lantern, just to kind of mix it into the thing.
Oh, nice. Nice.
That's fantastic. Oh my goodness. There's so much history here. What an interesting childhood. Yeah.
It seemed normal to me, though. I mean, it's interesting in retrospect, but when, if you ask me, was your childhood unusual? I'm like, no.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just a normal childhood, I guess. Because all the friends I grew up with in Turkey were the international students, and they kind of had similar backgrounds to me. It wasn't until I moved to the U.S. that I realized, hey, maybe that wasn't normal. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because when you're a kid, it's like whatever your reality is what's normal. And then you become an adult and you're like, oh, that wasn't your experience. And it's like so interesting to have those moments. Yeah. It's like my extended family gets along and we have nice times and just laugh when we're together. And then I hear other people dread Thanksgiving and I'm like, why? It's great. We all just hang out.
Yeah, no, same with me. I'm like, I joke that my family and I kind of had the Brady Bunch. Not that we were separate, but it was kind of that kind of family where everything was really nice. And, the biggest issue was that my sister scraped her knee. I mean, there were really no issues. So I've heard of stories since then, but I can't relate to any of them, as personally.
Yeah. So how many languages do you speak?
4 and a little bit of English.
Okay, so Turkish, I'm gonna guess.
Yes, Turkish. I speak Tagalog, which is a Filipino dialect. I speak Spanish. My French is pretty decent, and then English. And I can get by in Japanese, but I wouldn't put that on the list.
That's
Now,
so
how many
cool.
of those were like languages that you kind of grew up? Obviously, I'm guessing Turkish is one that you
Turkish,
grew
Tagalog,
up with.
and English were the ones I grew up.
Okay,
speaking.
so
Technically, English is my third language. Technically. Because my third word was English. I said something in Turkish first, and then I said something like the week afterwards that happened to be in Filipino, and then I said something in English. Looks great on your SATs when they're like, are you a native English speaker? Not really. I scored a pretty decent score on the English section.
So
Wow.
what language do you think in? Or is it
English.
a blend? You
English.
think in English?
Most of my schooling's been in English.
Okay.
Went to the American International School when I was growing up. My dad's American, even though he grew up in Rhodesia in Africa, so a whole nother story over there. And all my work has always been in English, so I'm pretty sure I think in English. There are those kind of, wire crossing when I can think of the word in another language, but I'm like, how do you say that in English? Half the time it's because there is no word in English for that, right? So that's kind of when the stumbling happens. But every once in a while, it's just an honest, I'm like, oh, that's the Spanish word. I can't figure out what to say in English. And it takes me a few seconds to kind of get past that.
Are there any words or concepts that come up frequently where you're like, there's no English equivalent?
Let me think. That's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. These things kind of come up serendipitously, kind of, in the middle of a conversation. A lot of those things that are idiomatic, there usually isn't. It's not so much of a word. If you, in Spanish, for example, you'd say mande, which is order me. But that's what you say for excuse me, right? It's just, that would not translate into English at all. In Turkish, I'm trying to think günaydın is kind of good morning, but it means bright day. I mean, you know, so there's these things that don't literally translate, but at least there's things that work. But there are other stuff that's, oh, provecho, that's one. Spanish, provecho. It translates to French to bon appetit, but there's no English word for that. What do you say when you want somebody to enjoy their meal other than saying, please enjoy your meal? There's no word for it in the English language. In Spanish and French, there is. So that's one that they use a lot in Mexico. And nobody in the U.S. There's no U.S. translation for provecho. There's nothing you would say when you pass somebody in a restaurant and they were eating a meal and saying for them to enjoy their meal. It would also be culturally weird. You know, if you just kind of walk by people. But here it's rude if you leave a restaurant, you pass by people and you don't say enjoy your meal on your way out.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Greetings are fascinating.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
So what part of Mexico are you living in right now?
I live in a city called Querétaro, Mexico, which is about 3 hours north of Mexico City, kind of in the Central Highlands area. It's not really the area that most tourists go to. You know, when people think of Mexico, myself included, before I joined the Peace Corps and they sent me to Mexico, I thought Mexico was beach. I mean, I went to college, I went to spring break in Cancun. That was my Mexico experience.
Sure.
I don't think I saw a single Mexican in those 2 weeks, but, you know, I was theoretically in Mexico.
Sure.
But most Mexicans live in this area, right? I'm about as high up as Denver. So I'm up in the mountains. Wow. So it's about 85 degrees year round, zero humidity. And this is old historic city. My wife and I renovated an old Spanish house. So kind of you imagine those haciendas. It's small. I mean, you know, house sizes in Mexico are not U.S. You know, we were looking to buy a place in the U.S. and I was like, okay, 2,000 square feet sounds good. And I start looking around. I'm like, there are no 2,000 square feet houses in the United States. I mean, you know, everything's like 2,500, 3,500. I mean, apartment maybe. But you can't find houses that size. 2,000 square feet is a big house in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the whole concept of size is different. But it's also one of the richest cities in Mexico. It's also one of the safest cities in Mexico. I know Mexico gets a bad rap for safety, but generally speaking, it's not, you know, I lived in Cleveland for a while. Ooh, trust me, there are certain parts of Cleveland I would not go to at night either. In Mexico is kind of the same, right? If you live in most places, there's a reason why you don't hear about tourists being shot in Mexico every day, because they're not. I mean, you know, it's just not, unless you're looking to buy or sell large quantities of crack cocaine or whatever drugs they're selling, you're probably going to be totally fine when you come down to Mexico. Typical travel stuff. You might get pickpocketed. The taxi driver will charge you too much because, you know, oh, it's a foreigner. But that's happened to me in Thailand. That happened to me in Morocco. That happened, you know, it's just part of travel. I've never felt unsafe in Mexico.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay. So we're not going to talk about Mexico today. However, I want to hear where should someone go and what should they do if they are going to visit Mexico?
Well, it depends on what you like to do, right? So they're the beaches. There's nothing wrong with those. My wife and I go to them, you know, every 6 months. We rent a house on a beach and we go and relax. That's nice. Wouldn't want to live there personally because 100% humidity and 100 degrees temperature is not my idea of a good time, you know, most days, right? It's fine for a week, but it's not something I'd want all the time. If you want the real Mexico experience, I recommend the area I live in, which is called El Bajío, which is the whole central region. Bajío is not an official name for the area. It's just kind of the central region. Great place to visit. I love Mexico City. Most people don't even think about it, but it's a cosmopolitan city. You have a mix of modern, you know, there are Michelin star restaurants, right? You can go to El Pujol and all the rest of it. But then, you know, a 30-minute drive away, there's a 3,000 euro Teotihuacan pyramids, which you can do a hot air balloon ride over in the morning. My wife and I have done that twice, and see the mist burn off of these pyramids that were built 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and everything in between. Day of the Dead, if you've seen, for those of you, you know, that's the greatest time, in my opinion, to visit Mexico, visit Coco. You know, if you guys don't know what that is, watch Coco. That's pretty much it. But, you know, there's all over the place. We put up an altar in our house as well for, you know, all of our families passed away, and every house does it. It's a wonderful time to come to Mexico. Mexican food, there's a reason why it's one of the top 5 foods in the world. It's delicious. And wouldn't you love paying 90%? You know, when I go to the U.S. and I went to a conference in Austin about 3 years ago to speak, and they're like, let's go out for tacos. And my reflex is like, I live in Mexico. I'm not coming to the U.S. to go out for tacos. I mean, that's not really high on my list. But everybody did, so we went out for tacos. And then I got the bill, and I was like, I got 3 tacos for like $9. This is highway robbery. That would be like all you can eat taco buffet in Mexico. I mean, it's like 50 cents per taco down here. So if you want to, get great Mexican food for 10% of, 10% of the US costs.
Yeah.
It's a great
in
way
the
to do it.
country that it's from.
Yeah. It's
Exactly,
like
exactly.
actually legit Mexican food because it's in Mexico.
I thought Taco Bell was Mexican food, honestly, until I moved to Mexico.
Really?
Yeah, I had no idea. I'd never been to Mexico before.
Sure,
I'm like, I got chalupa. I'm like, you guys don't have chalupas or burritos? Like burritos aren't even Mexican. I mean, nobody in Mexico. If you ask
They're
for a burrito
inspired.
in Mexico,
Yeah.
it's a small donkey. Somebody will sell you a small donkey. That's all the word means.
Sure. Yeah.
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 Yep.
So
Yeah.
you will not get food unless
I never
you
really
happen
thought
to eat
about that.
donkey. Yeah. So
That's so funny. Oh man. Although I think it is fun. I went to an American restaurant in Japan and it was really fun
McDonald's?
to see. No, like a nice restaurant that was like, we are American style and we sat in chairs as opposed to on the floor and there was a fork and knife. And I was staying with a family. And so they were like asking me how to use the fork and knife. And it was a really cool experience seeing how another country does like American
We did not do
food.
that in Japan. Yeah, when we were in Japan, we we did the soba noodle places. I'd never had cold soba noodles before, which was an interesting concept. And that was
Oh,
actually
interesting.
really good. It was really hot. But my wife and I, that was the last big trip we did together before COVID hit. Was about 6 weeks in
Aw.
Japan.
Oh, that's
wow.
so cool.
That is awesome.
Well, yeah. So I don't know. I think the idea of if you live in Mexico of like having Mexican food in other countries kind of
Our
interesting.
favorite pizza
but-
place is Little Caesars here
Yeah.
in Mexico.
Oh.
So I'll be honest. I mean, come
Yes.
on. We Uber Eats Little Caesars all the time. So, yeah. I'm not missing out on much. There's a Chili's. I can go to Chili's. I can, Outback Steakhouse down the road. I mean, I'm not missing Olive Garden. They just opened in one of those in my city. So
Oh,
I'm
that's
not
hilarious.
missing too much. Like so.
Oh,
Awesome.
man.
Well, we've got a set of 3 questions that we like to ask all of our guests. The first one is, why do you travel?
I don't know how to live any other way.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I if you ask a lot of people when was the first time on the plane, they could tell you. I was on a plane when I was 10 months old.
Hmm.
I think very few periods in my life that I could go 24 months where I didn't travel somewhere. Not by choice. For the first, 15, 16 years of my life, it was just my parents would be moving. It was kind of going from Istanbul to visit my aunt in Germany would be just like, me living in Boston and saying going to Western Mass. I mean, it was just not something that we considered like this big deal. Oh, let's get on a plane. It's 3 or 4 hours away.
Yeah.
We'll go and have lunch in Frankfurt today. I mean, it was just kind of the way we grew up. We didn't have very much money. So don't get me wrong. It's not like we had private jets or anything, but it was just, travel is not as expensive as a lot of people think if you get down to it, right? If you plan ahead and you get your tickets and you're not like last minute getting those really expensive tickets, you can travel at a relatively affordable rate, especially now during COVID. They're probably giving tickets away. But once you get past that fear of, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me? The world opens up, and I wouldn't know how to close the world back down, again, since I've never actually done that, and I just continue to travel.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking to 2 travel lovers here. So of course, everything you're saying is resonating.
Preaching to the choir, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like, yes, I want to do more. Yes.
Yeah.
Because Cheryl's done some, at least domestic travel here in the US this year. But I guess technically I did back in February. 2020 feels like a million years
Yeah,
long,
exactly.
so I
that was
forgot
right
it
before they
the same
started
year.
closing everything down, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
but
he
I
was like one of the
haven't
last people in Disneyland, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
but
I saw
haven't.
you. They were kicking you out there right as they were closing the doors. Right?
No, not quite that late. But
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, that's someday travel will open up again, and we'll be able to travel the way we
Well,
want again.
the vaccines, looks promising, so it might be in the next 6 to 12 months. It might be, I'm not thinking it's going to be the next third, it's not going to be January that we're all hopping on planes, but maybe by the end of 2021, it'll be pseudo back to normal.
yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Me too. I'm in the same boat. Exactly.
All right. So what type of traveler are you, Ray?
See, if you'd asked me that at different phases of my life, I would have given you totally different answers, right? So in my 20s, I was in the Peace Corps. I was the typical backpacker. Let's stay at youth hostels, all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, you get into your 30s. I'm like, I want my own bathroom. So, that changed a little bit. I was like, I don't necessarily want to get a secondhand high from the group of people sleeping next to me tonight. And, so we moved on to a little bit more, not, I wouldn't say expensive, but kind of the more reasonable places. And now we've moved now because of the lifestyle we've built, which means I can work from anywhere. I can live anywhere. We're very much slow travelers. The concept of we'd love to go to a place for minimum 6 weeks. We do not do less than that for travel. We try to do at least 3 months in any travel we do. Yeah. I know we're lucky to be in this position. And that's the way we travel now. So we always learn the basics of the language whenever we go there. Not too much. I mean, when I went to Thailand in October, I could say thank you, and I probably pronounced it so badly they barely understood it. And I knew the basic numbers and the rest of it. But we like to kind of get to know the culture. So when we do Airbnbs, we try to stay right outside of the tourist areas for the Airbnbs. There's usually nicer residential areas where the locals live, and we kind of try to stay there. And we just kind of stay in one place and kind of do the traveling from there. It's another change from like my backpacker days. Back when I was working in the US, corporate America, they'd give you 10 days of vacation days a year, and you'd say, thank you, sir. That kind of travel, because you only had that time, you got to hit it all, right? Okay, Monday we're seeing these 4 sites. Tuesday we're seeing these. And you come back from the vacation, you're like, oh, I'm exhausted. I need some time off. We didn't want to go back to that. And it's so much nicer when you can okay, we're here for 6 weeks. Let's say we were in Kyoto for 6 weeks, right? So we would wake up in the morning, did a few hours of, answering emails and stuff. Then we went to the, something Inari, Fushimi Inari, I think that's how you say, the Fushimi Inari Shrine, which is all those red gates. And we just hiked there in the afternoon. We came back. We're like, the next day, we're tired. So we're like, oh, there's a restaurant. We don't know what it serves because we can't read the signs, but let's go and eat there today. And then we went back and we just relaxed in the house, right? I mean, that kind of, and then the next day, we're like, oh, let's go and see the local palace. And that kind of travel, we find a lot more enjoyable these days than go. Here's a tour group. Let's see these 20 sites. And you have like 30 seconds to snap the same photo everybody else snaps. It's a kind of different experience.
Well, and essentially like short-term living in different places is
that's exactly
what you're describing.
That's exactly it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think one of the good things about the pandemic, if I can venture to say good, is I think it has forced us to rethink work and rethink what those things look like. Where a lot of people are like, oh, I could never do my job online. Like, oh, actually, yes, you can, because you have to.
Well, that's one of the things. Yeah, that people have asked me. So, how has COVID affected your job? I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't have even noticed for the most part. I mean, I've been working this what they call location independent lifestyle for about 12 years now. And so kind of on a work basis, it hasn't affected me at all. My entire staff. So total between contractors and full-time, I have about 150 staff. Don't have an office anywhere, no rent. Everybody works from home. So it hasn't affected the work. If anything, since they're language teachers, they have more work now than they had before. But our lifestyles have not changed very much.
That's awesome.
I mean, I'm a little envious. Not enough that I think I want to completely switch careers.
Yeah.
Well, you don't necessarily have to switch careers. You just have to find a way to make your career online, right? I mean, that's it.
Yes. Well, yes. So I'm a high school science teacher, and definitely there are online schools, but doing online right now, not a big fan.
Yeah. My sister was my wife. I come from a family of teachers, right? My dad's a teacher, professors. My wife's a teacher. My sister was a teacher. She did Teach for America. That after 2 years of that, she's like, I don't know if I can do this for the rest of my life. Now she's a social worker, which is considerably easier. And my total respects, teachers can move online. We won't go too far off track on this because
sure. Online
business is my passion, and most of my businesses have been in education. But there are things you can do online which aren't teaching, like creating courses and material that you can use to monetize. That can give you a lot more freedom. A good friend of mine, her name's Gabby Wallace. She's an English teacher. She brought in about $500,000 in profit last year, but she's very popular on YouTube teaching English. Just as, you can still teach in the classroom if you feel like it, but you have a little bit more of freedom out there. And part of the hurdle that people have to kind of pass is, as teachers, you love interacting with your students.
Right.
And that's part of the thing that's really hard. But the other side is, imagine how many other people you could help by doing this, right? Right now in your classrooms, 20 people, 30 people, which is still way too many, 30 students in a classroom, but I know a lot of schools have that. But that's the maximum number of people you can reach. But if you start doing things online, suddenly you can reach 300, 3,000. Somebody in Bangladesh who needs your help, you're helping them. In Africa, somebody who's never had access to your knowledge, you're able to do that. And the way you monetize it is, if you charged everybody $1 a year, but you helped 1 million kids a year, you're done. I mean,
It's
so
true.
then you are traveling as much as you want. So
That's true.
That's a road to freedom.
Ryan's gonna quit his job at the end of this podcast.
Not my fault if you do it. I'm not taking any blame for that. But yeah.
Well, I'm definitely not quitting yet.
Yeah.
But maybe at some point we'll see. I've looked into teaching in international schools. I've looked at a lot of different things.
We're looking at that for my wife. We want to move to Southeast Asia, and where she's looking, Singapore. They have a big lack of teachers. So we're looking at Singapore. One, they pay their teachers very well. And two, Singapore is a great base for anybody who wants to explore Southeast Asia, right? It's like the hub of that and Hong Kong are like the hubs for the whole area. So you get in there, you want to go to Bali for the weekend? I'm like, yeah, so you can get a flight for like $30. It's an hour and a half flight and you're in Bali, or you want to go to Thailand or Myanmar or Vietnam or Philippines or anything. All from Singapore is really accessible, except you live in a first world country. So you kind of get to come back to modern conveniences.
Yeah. All right. So with your huge amounts of experience, what would you say is your number one travel tip?
My number one travel tip, well, other than the just do it, because I think only 40% of Americans actually have a passport, right? So just the biggest obstacle is that most Americans do not travel. But my number one travel tip would be, if you haven't traveled before, start with the English-speaking countries. It's what I recommend to all my friends who are new. So go to the UK. It's exotic enough that you'll still have a great time, but you're not going to have any language barriers other than them telling you to wait in a queue and cars coming at you the wrong way on the street. You won't have that much issue, and that's a great way to dip your feet in the water. As opposed to, like Cheryl said, Japan, that might be rough for a first-time traveler.
Yeah,
sure.
More people speak English than I was told, because when we got there, like, nobody speaks English. I'm like, I found that not to be true. A lot of people did speak English, especially because they were planning for the Olympics when we were there last year. So like all the trains were in English, signs were in English, everything was in English when we were there. But I wouldn't recommend that to first-time travelers. And even if you want rougher places, not rougher in the sense that with less comforts than we're used to. So, don't do Thailand on your first trip. Don't do, backpacking through the rural India on your first trip if you've never traveled before. That's really rough. Just go to the UK. And then you can go a little more exotic, go to Italy where it's still pretty developed, but they don't speak your language. So you're getting a little deeper into the pool. And then you can sign and work your way up. Yeah. So I guess that's a pretty long-winded travel tip, but hopefully.
Oh, that's a great tip though.
It is.
I really appreciate that because I think that is a huge barrier that keeps some people from traveling. And I think that's a really good way of like, well, I'd like to try it, but it's kind of like, it's almost like traveling with training wheels.
That's it. That's exactly it. I mean, pick Australia would work too. Any English, New Zealand, Australia, they're exotic enough that you're in another country, you're getting a plane, you're getting, how do passports work, all the rest of it. But you're not worried about how am I going to ask for the bathroom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're like, that's the same. So,
Well, and I would even take that a step backwards as well. Like for someone who lives in the US, if they haven't traveled just like across the country, like there are so many different cultures within this country that you could have a totally new cultural experience like without a passport and maybe get comfortable with it if you haven't even done that, and so
I'm reading the Hillbilly eulogy right now. If you guys haven't read it, was written by somebody who grew up in the Appalachians. But then he ended up going to Yale, and you might have seen him on TV. It was kind of a popular book about a year and a half ago. And reading about that, I feel like I'm reading about another country because just the way that they live is just so different. My family is luckily, educated from the New England area, and I intellectually knew that happened. But when you read about somebody growing up in that, and I'm like, yeah, that's totally different. There were no ODs in the house next door, when I was growing up. It was just not something that I ever experienced. And somebody that's just normal. yeah, of course they have a different worldview than you. It's a different country.
Yeah.
It's a different,
Yeah.
So yeah, the U.S. has so many different things. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you say the name of that book was again?
It's called The Hillbilly Eulogy by.
Hillbilly Eulogy.
You'll look it up. It was a New York Times bestseller about a year ago. I can't remember the author's name.
I'm
And when
sure
I say
Google
reading
will
it,
find
I
it
mean,
then.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
we'll find
mean, listening to it on Audible.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's really what I
perfect.
mean. Yeah. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So what trip are you going to tell us about today?
okay, so the trip I'm going to tell you about is it's going to be a journey, but with multiple phases. And it was when my wife and I went to Peru about, I guess that was 3 years ago, maybe 4. Time flies. Especially with the COVID, it's like time kind of goes fast and slow. So you
Yes.
totally lose any, maybe it was 2 years ago. I don't know. It was a few years ago. So my wife and I, we went to Peru and we decided to do the Incan Trail. And then we decided to splurge on something at the end of it, which I'll get to. That's kind of my lead up. So you don't, the listeners don't go away, which ended up being much more of an exotic experience at the end than we thought. So, so we flew the story starts of us flying into Cusco. So if anybody's been there, the airport is Cusco's in the mountains of Peru, very high up. I live at I'm thinking feet, 6,000 feet. Cusco's at around 10,000 feet, right? So altitude. You fly in, and then suddenly you're kind of looking out the windows because all the flights going from Lima to Cusco are either really late at night or really early in the morning. You fly in, the mist kind of blows away, and you look to your left, and you're like, I'm 100 feet away from a mountain. Like you're looking out of your window, and you can see people just like waving at you like a car's going by. Your plane's flying this thing because that's what you have to do to kind of get to the airport in Cusco. It's crazy. You kind of go through this valley, and the mountain's like just right over there, and so they land the plane in Cusco. We spent 2 weeks there because I am awful at altitude. I grew up at sea level, right? Istanbul, Turkey, Philippines, Boston in the United States, Cleveland, San Francisco. I have never lived at altitude in my life until I moved to Mexico. So we got there 2 weeks in advance because we'd heard all these horror stories about altitude sickness and all the rest of it. And I'm like, my cardio is awful. So I'm about to do the Incan Trail. I'm not going to do it when I also have a splitting headache and can't see straight and all the rest of it. So we got there. Altitude sickness didn't really seem to be an issue. Breathing was, but that's I would go up flights. I'd go up flights of stairs and go, I would just go up like 10 flights of stairs. And we try to stay in shape. I do exercise. I practice martial arts. So I'm like, I didn't go in there not being in shape, but still, altitude doesn't care what kind of shape you're in. Right. It will knock you over. So we spent 2 weeks there, did some cool stuff in Cusco. Like we made a coffee making class and chocolate making classes, all cooking classes.
Fun.
Yeah, and because we love coffee. I got a cup right over here. So it's all these different ways of making coffee. Afterwards, we start the Incan Trail. So first day you're doing the Incan Trail. They bring you into a room in the office of your tour group. The Incan Trail is a very limited trail. Only 100 people are allowed on it a day, which means there's a total, it's a 4-day trail. There are only 400 people on the trail at any given time, right? Because 100 people kind of at any given section. You have to reserve generally 6 months in advance because it books up. You can't just show up and say, I'm going to do the Incan Trail. They won't. There's going to be no room for you when you do that. So they bring you into this office of this tour group. You meet your guide. All the guides speak fantastic English. And you meet the rest of the people in your group. Groups are generally small depending on the agency you go with, but we're talking like 5 to 12 people maximum. Okay. So they give us orientation. They tell us, they kind of look around the room based on how experienced of a hiker you are. And we're not super experienced, but we've done a few. And they're like, yeah, you probably want less stuff because, or you can pay extra for somebody to carry it. But just because you think it's 10 pounds, trust me, 10 pounds for the next 4 days at this altitude, that's a lot. Yeah. Make sure, just take water bottles with you. Everything else, let us carry it or leave it behind. They take small bags for you to the campgrounds. So like change of clothes, they will carry, but everything else, you have to pay extra if you want them to carry it for you, right? So like, this doesn't seem so bad. So we're looking around the room. There's a few things we noticed right off the bat when we were looking around at our group, with 1 or 2 exceptions. First off, everybody in the room was in their 30s, between 30 and 40 years old. So my first initial, I'm like, that's kind of strange, right? Because I thought, hey, young backpackers would want to do this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't after I started meeting people. So we had lawyers, we had people in the U.S. State Department, we had, business owners, all the rest of it in this group. It occurred to me, yeah, because the Incan Trail is not cheap. It costs about $1,000 a person for this 4-day hike. So 30 to 40 puts you in probably the age range where you can, okay, especially if it's one or two of us, that's something we can pay for without really, putting on the credit card or breaking the bank, right? In addition, they have to fly to Cusco and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part is between 30 and 40, you're still physically fit enough to probably do the Incan Trail. So it's like that perfect crossroad of where you're making enough money, but you can actually still do this trail. Now, there's an exception. There were a couple that were in their late 60s in this group, lawyers from New York City. They completed it. One had a lung transplant, had one lung removed, but he still was able to do it. He's the exception, the outlier. And there was this one girl who was 18. Her parents paid for it. So that's also an outlier on that end. But generally, our group was there. So that's the deal. You start the next day at a reasonable hour. That's how they fool you. So the next day, they kind of get you out there. They take the van. You drive from Cusco to the Sacred Valley. It's about a 3-hour drive. That's where the Incan Trail starts. So you're driving through. You get to meet everybody else. It feels kind of like boot camp because we're about to all go do this physical thing together. So there's kind of this bonding thing going out. And then the first day they drop you off at this beginning of this river in this valley. And they even tell you, today's the easy day. We're just going to be pretty much flat along this river for the next 4 or 5 hours. And so, you get there and you start walking. And again, if you're in decent shape, you can do, I was still breathing hard because it's altitude. Right. Even from Cusco, we've gone up Cusco's about 8,000 feet. We've gone up to about 10,000 feet before we started the trail.
Wow.
So we're walking at 10,000 feet and walking even flat at 10,000 feet. You'll be breathing hard, within about 15, 20 minutes if you're doing it. So we're walking, beautiful. This is nice. Right at the end, for the last 30 minutes, there's a big hike, and then that's kind of your taste of what's to come. Is that last 30 minutes, we were all like, trying to get up this 30-minute hike, and they set up a tent for you up there. So it is glamping in a way because we get there, our tents are already set up, and we had salmon, rice dinners, with a cake that the guy made. It was excellent, delicious dinners while we were there. But then they come, our guide comes up, and he's like, okay, tomorrow it really starts. This is the Incan Trail. So the next day, you have to do a climb from 10,000 feet up to 14,000 feet with stairs. And that's about 4 hours of straight going up. Imagine going upstairs for 4 straight hours at 10,000 feet. So you're kind of getting to the highest part of the Incan Trail.
I can't imagine that.
It was rough. As I said, my cardio is awful. My wife was waiting for me. So I remember distinctly that I was I would take 10 steps, and it wouldn't be that my legs would feel tired. I just wouldn't feel my legs because they weren't getting enough oxygen. So I had to stop and then take another 10 steps and stop and take another 10 steps and stop because it was just this is really weird. It's not like the gym where your legs are burning or anything like that. I just can't actually really feel them. So pretty much I did that. It was supposed to be 4 hours. It probably took me 6. To kind of get up to the top there. But the views are amazing. If you've seen kind of those typical views of the Andes, literally herds of llama were just running up the hills of wild llama running up the hills. Every once in a while, you'd see the typical kind of, Incan kind of garb with the headdress with the colorful. That's really what they wear because it's cold up there. So they're staying warm. Yeah. And, one guy was playing the wind flutes. I'm like, wow. That stereotype really holds up because he was just sitting there playing the wind flutes up there. But we just see mountain, waterfalls coming down from the mountain, pristine lakes and all the rest of it. Amazing. And that pretty much continues for the next 3 or 4 days when you're doing it. But the cool part is when you're doing the Incan Trail was the path that the old Incans would use to get to Machu Picchu, which is at the end of the Incan Trail. Machu Picchu was a city for the royals and the religious leaders, not for everybody. And it was secret, even from the locals. So this was the secret path that they would do to find it. That's why nobody found Machu Picchu until about 80 years ago, even though the Spanish looked for it when the conquistadors were there. Nobody could actually find it. But you pass through forts, cities, and other temples on the way there. And the only people who could see these fort cities and temples are the people on the Incan Trail because there's no roads. Helicopters can't fly you in because it's too high of an altitude. So unless you do the Incan Trail, you will never see these ruins. There's absolutely no other way of seeing these places. So it's really cool. You get there and there's these small, maybe a dozen people, 24 people, half of them are from your group anyway. And you just get to check out all these, there was a science center they built because they built terraces so that it was half a degree of temperature difference between the terrace sites, and they would plant corn on each one to figure out exactly what the perfect height. No, they knew so much stuff back then. And they explain all this stuff to you while you're on the trail. And the temperature changes. You go from jungle to pine forest. And I remember there was one part, my favorite image of the trail was about day 2 or 3, and we were walking kind of along the ridge of a mountain. And I looked to the right, it had drizzled in the morning, and we were above the clouds. But the clouds below, for some reason, the wind must have come through. It looked like a river. They were moving so fast that through the Andes Mountains, it looked like a river of clouds was flowing, just like a fast flowing river. And we were just looking down at it. It was just moving past us. I was like, that is so cool. So you do that. Amazing experience. It's grueling. You don't shower for those 4 days. I'll add an anecdote to that at the end. But when you finish, it ends at Machu Picchu. But you don't go through the front door where everybody else goes through. You can take a train up, and that's where all these tourists end up going. They let you get in at 5 a.m. before anybody else goes there. You enter through the back, which is the high point, and you sit there and you watch the sun come up over Machu Picchu with nobody in Machu Picchu. And you get 1 hour free in Machu Picchu before any of the other tourists come in there. So when we got there, it was just us and the other 100 people or so people that we were, on the trail with that day. An hour later, there were literally 5,000 people in Machu Picchu. I mean, literally, you were shoulder to shoulder and you could barely see anything, but we had at least 1 hour in Machu Picchu without anybody else. And at the end, when you come back, they put you on a train, and a small, it's like a 30-minute train to a place called Aguascalientes, which has hot springs, which are really dinky hot springs. But trust me, after you've done the Incan Trail, they feel amazing. But we got on the train. It's kind of a nice train. And then somebody, because our group was there, and somebody like 2 stairs back starts going, something stinks on this train. What is it? It was us. None of us had showered in 4 days. We had been, we had been stinking the whole time. We thought it was fine. But if you guys go to Machu Picchu and you see groups of people that don't smell very good, it's probably because they arrived on the Incan Trail, and that was us. So that was the first part of the trip. So we had done that. It was grueling. My legs hurt. So we wanted to do the second part, which is the other story you guys asked me to tell. We're like, okay, we're going to splurge a little bit. We were going to a silent meditation retreat in Lake Titicaca, which is another city on the other side of the Andes. So what they have is they have this train that goes from Cusco to Lake Titicaca. It's about a 11 or 12-hour train ride, and it's run by the Orient Express organization, right? So kind of really high-end train, Michelin star chef, all the rest of it. And so when we decided to splurge, me and my wife were like, let's just do that. We need to relax for a day before we start doing other stuff. So let's sign up for the train. So we went to their website. The website did a little glitchy thing when I was trying to sign up, and I'm like, that's weird. Okay, anyway, let me pick on Saturday and make a date, right? And so I picked the date, paid, we were done. So the morning of the train ride, we both show up at this train station, and it's made in kind of this English fashion because it's based off of the Incan Trail, right? And so we sit and we get there 30 minutes early, like a good American. That's on time, right? So we get there and like nobody else is there. And I'm like, this is kind of strange. Generally the train has 25 people. That's the maximum people would be on the train. But I'm like, 30 minutes early is not ridiculous. We get there, they make us sit in this British waiting room, and some Peruvian guy, we speak Spanish. So we kind of came up and it's like, hey, would you like anything? And so yes, a coffee, and they bring us crumpets. I didn't even know what crumpets were before that, but get some crumpets. And we're sitting there waiting, and so 15 minutes for the train to leave. Still nobody there. 5 minutes before the train to leave, I started thinking, I'm like, they must have just taken everybody else straight onto the train, right? Because there's nobody else in this room. 8 o'clock comes around. Guy comes in. He's like, let me take you to the train. So they take our bags because, we were traveling. So they take our bags. They bring it in. We kind of walk into the train. I look around. I'm like, there's nobody else here. What's going on? So the conductor turns to us and says, look, somehow you guys were able to make a reservation on a day our train was not supposed to run. But we are honoring your tickets, and this train is for you two for the entire day. It's a luxury train. I mean, we're talking, high-end stuff. Michelin star chef in the food cabin making us food. And my wife were like, really? You're kidding? I'm like, no. We have 35 people on this train. We're all here to make your ride a perfect.
Oh my gosh.
So we're kind of sitting, make you sit in the food cart. Really fancy food cart, big stuff out there. We're sitting down. They bring us breakfast, and it looks, it's those fancy little bite-sized plates, but like 6 different portions. And they're like, we have plenty of food. So if you guys want like seconds or thirds of this, just ask us. The chef will make you guys whatever you want. We discovered quinoto, which is risotto with quinoa. Delicious.
Ooh, that sounds good.
It's really good. Really, really good. Like alpaca steaks and all the rest of it.
Oh my goodness.
And so I turned around to him. I was like, because the waiters had nothing better to do. I mean, we were the only people there. So I turned around like, has anybody ever rented this train before? Yeah, it happens sometimes. Usually they're Saudi princes. We're like, what?
I was about to say it sounds like a royalty treatment.
It is.
Yes.
And I'm like, really? Tell me, how much does it cost? Oh, it rents out for $50,000 for if you want to rent out the entire train. I'm like, yeah, we did not pay anything close to that, right? I mean, I think it was $800 a person. So like, we paid like $1,600 for a $50,000 train privately through the Andes. So the train gets off and we're going there. There's a few things we noticed.
Best Groupon ever.
I know, I was just like, this is crazy. First thing we noticed is this is how the other, that one, the not the 1%, but the 1% of the 1% live. Because one, it's a little bit of work because we were really self-conscious. You got like 10 waiters like staring at your table for like the entire trip. You're like, I dropped a fork once and I think 3 of them dove across the floor because they had nothing better to do. To try to pick up my fork. We had live music, so there were 2 bands on the train. So they came out there and the first one was playing. I'm like, this is great. Of course, we had to buy their CDs because there's nobody else on the train to buy their CDs. So I gotta pick that up. But the second band was awful. We still had to sit there for the entire show because if we got up and walked away, if there were 20 people on the train, we would have gotten up and walked to the other cart. Because there was a music cart as well.
Oh my goodness.
But we couldn't. So we had to sit there and watch a band that was really bad for like 45 minutes on the train ride as well. We had to partake in all the activities. They had like, drink making and all that kind of stuff. They took us to meet the chef. But the most embarrassing part of the trip was right in the midway point of the trip, the train stops in the middle of what looks like the mountains. Because what happens is all the local indigenous people come up and they set up a market for this train, so that they can sell goods to the rich people who are normally on that train. So the train stops. They're all waiting there. They line up to kind of give us a royal treatment and clap as people walk off the train. Oh, geez. Me and my wife in like backpacker clothes step off. We kind of walk around there. They're clapping, and then they kind of look back into the train, waiting for other people to disembark. And I'm like, it's just us. It's just us.
Oh, geez.
And we didn't buy anything from the whole market that they had set up only for us for the day. And we were like, oh, this is so embarrassing. We don't want any of these. We don't need any of these things. We're backpacking. We're traveling light. We don't, we have no room for any of the things we were there.
Yeah.
So at the end of that day, while it was a really cool experience, we got to the end and we both kind of had a sigh of relief because we're like, oh, we were like, had to be on. I'm an introvert. Most people don't believe it. My wife is even more so than me. And we were just like, oh, it's so nice not to have to like be performing now because there's not somebody staring at me for the next 30 minutes. But it makes a really amazing story that we have been able to rent a private luxury train through the Andes for the day. And it was a great way to end our Incan Trail experience.
Oh my goodness. You definitely can't plan something like that.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, if you have $50,000, you can. But,
well,
Ryan, hey, helping a million students for $1. I'm telling you.
There you go.
You can use that for your daily commute. No, that's not a problem.
Yeah, no problem. Why not? I'll just buy a train and just be on the train. I'll teach from the train.
Train school.
There you go.
Wow. Oh my goodness. What a trip. That was neat.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, we have a couple follow-up questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is based on the title of our show, Take Me With You. If you could take us with you to just one thing on this trip, what would it be and why?
The one thing would actually not be the train. It would be that day where you got to see the clouds flow through the Andes Mountains like a river. That to me is... I'm not religious, but it was almost a spiritual experience. I mean, that was just so amazing to watch. You're middle of nowhere. You hear birds chirping. There is water flowing around you, but it's just like these little drips and streams. So it feels like you're here listening to water, but it looks like a cloud river just flowing through the mountains.
So cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I thought you were going to say the train just so, it'd be less awkward.
It would have helped
for like
both of you guys
reason.
there as well. Exactly. I'm like, at least. Also, when we left, we had to leave a tip, and we're like, we'll leave $100 tip. That's a pretty big tip. But I'm like, I can't tip 35 people on a train. I mean, that's just not in our budget. It's fine when you're splitting it between 25 other people.
Yeah.
But I'm like, each person got like a $2 tip for the day for like their entire work. I think. And I was like, I felt awful. So.
They're like calling their web developer, like, how dare you? That's awesome. That sounds amazing. And this next question is a little bit more of a bummer in COVID times. So normally the question is, what's your next trip? And if you have a next trip, we'd love to hear about it. Or what do you hope your next trip will be?
Okay, my next trip is actually going to be a much smaller thing, not as exotic, even though we have multiple trips planned and, as soon as this is done. But the next trip
Nice.
is my son was born in January and he has not met his grandparents in Boston yet. So my next trip is
Aw.
to Boston so that grandma and grandpa can meet their grandson.
Nice. That's awesome. And do you have any travel questions for us?
Mm. Okay, so my travel question for you guys is, what is the best trip you guys have each taken and how do I go there?
Ooh.
Hmm.
See, that's tricky.
Best trip.
Best trip. For so many different reasons. Like Cheryl and I kind of have our go-to countries. Like we have
Yes.
kind of our favorite countries that we like to go to.
Mhm.
But I don't know as far as like best trip. Gosh, that's so hard.
What? Give us a criteria. What type of best trip?
Unforgettable experience.
Oh gosh.
That doesn't help either, but yeah,
Nope.
that's what we look for.
Nope.
Unforgettable experience. Are you looking for unique or like what?
It
type
doesn't
of
have to be. Generally, unforgettable does have that kind of glean of uniqueness, right? Because otherwise, it's hey, I got a churro today is not an I mean, that's sure,
Yeah.
and I do every day, right? Even though it's churros are amazing, but there's that aspect of uniqueness to it. But that's not the only thing that makes these experiences unforgettable. I mean, the example with the river that we're talking about, when we saw the sun rise over the Sahara Desert, that was unforgettable. Generally, it's got very little to do with costs. Maybe getting there is expensive, but the experience itself is more of a, it makes you feel something.
I think I have one.
Okay.
And I'm
Good,
pretty
'cause
sure
I'm still thinking.
I think I've shared about this on the podcast, but now I don't even remember when it would have been. So one of the countries that I love to visit is Slovenia. And I've got quite a few friends that live there. And several years ago, I was there and I went up to a smaller kind of town called Bled. That's up kind of in the northern part of Slovenia. And one of my friends, his family is one of the families that makes and then runs the wooden boats that go out on the lake. Because there's no like motorized vehicles allowed on the lake at all. And so I was there, drove up, met him, and it was when they were celebrating, and I don't remember how many thousands of years or whatever, but like, the anniversary of, the founding of the city. And so they do this big celebration at night. And so he took me and a few other people that were up there as well. We went out on one of their boats, one of those wooden boats that, most people have to rent, but that's what their family does. So he just took us out there and we're out on the lake. And one of the things that they do at night as part of the celebration, they've got stuff, they have some concert that's on the beach and stuff like that, but they get eggs and they break the eggshells and they like just leave the shells half and then they put candles in them and they light the candles and they put them on the water and they float out into the lake. And so there's all of these little tiny lights just out on the lake. And so not only was I there to see that, but we were in boats going through them.
You were taking part in it instead of the tourist observer. Wow.
Exactly. And then they did, they had like, that's something that sounds like, it could have been around from a long time ago. And then of course they had modern stuff, like they had fireworks. And so we're on the lake with all these things, watching a fireworks show. And there's a castle up kind of on the side that overlooks Lake Bled. And they had like laser projections on that. And it was just like, it was like old and new. And it was just very, very memorable and kind of one of those unforgettable experiences. So I don't know if you've been to Slovenia or not.
Not yet. I've heard a lot of great things about that part of the world. That's, it's still kind of the unexplored tourist area because it's, it's the part of Europe that most people don't look at.
Yeah.
We're definitely looking to go there sometime.
Yeah. I love Slovenia. So that would be the one that I can think of as far as an unforgettable experience.
Okay.
Oh boy.
So Ryan's off the hook. Now Cheryl's on the hook.
I think part that's tripping me up now is how do you get there? Because I'm thinking about no. Yeah, the time I went to Mars. No, like I'm thinking about, I mean, I think the truly like unforgettable moments I've had are moments with locals where I'm doing something that's not touristy. I think I went on a trip to Spain 2 years ago by myself for 3 weeks, and I talk about it on this podcast a lot, but I think that the moments from that trip that were really amazing are like when I was visiting a local and they're just like either taking me to their local restaurant where like I'm the only person who's just not like from that town, or cooking with them, or getting to visit a part of the country that most people don't think about or go to. And I think those were some of the moments where it was just like really fun to just feel like I was getting to be a part of living there, and just like not just seeing, I mean, I love touristy stuff. There's a reason those things are popular, and but I think just experiencing like life with locals is truly wonderful, and then you get to see the good stuff, too. And so
that's what the Peace Corps is all about. So if you guys are looking for a way to travel for 2 years with something paid for, that's the whole experience. You get sent to places. When I was in the Peace Corps, I was in a place that was totally, okay, it was a little touristy, but most people in the world have never heard of it. And I got to live there for 2 years and get to, meet the locals, learn about the Mayan culture in that case. I can agree with Cheryl. It's a great, great experience. And it's a different way of traveling, and that kind of helps shape you as a person.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think when I was the first time I went to Spain, it was in 2000, and my family was visiting a family we knew over there, and they took us to this restaurant that used to be a wine cellar, and it was like in this cave. And I don't even know. I've tried to Google it. I don't know where it was.
It's in Granada. They have a lot of like restaurants and caves.
It's not in Granada. It's like somewhere between, like in the Leon area, kind of. But it was just like locals going to dinner there, and we got to like cook our food at our table. They had like a hot plate there, and just like seeing everyone like, going out to eat with their families and stuff. And in this place where I was like, there are no other Americans here. And so I love that so much more. Yeah. But I think I need to look into Airbnb experiences more, because one of my friends was just telling me, like, I mean, if you have connections and you can find locals because, friends of friends or whatever, that's the best. However, she's done some of those types of things just through the experiences where it's like some local who's like she said she went to Thailand, and like this woman did an Airbnb experience where she just like took them to the market to buy food, took them to their apartment to eat.
I was on the same one, I think, when I was in Thailand. I'm like, that sounds familiar. I did exactly that when she took us to the floating market. She took us to her stay.
That's so cool. Yeah. So I've never done those. I need to look those up apparently next time I travel, because that sounds like a great experience. So.
As a small business owner, I love supporting other ones, and that's essentially who those people are, right? They're not these. Yep. Sometimes a tour agency sneaks in there, but it's actually against Airbnb policy for you, for a tour agency to do it. But cool. There's ways around it. But generally speaking, it's kind of individuals. My cooking class I did was an Airbnb experience. He ended up being like a mini celebrity. He was like, I have a show on TV here in Thailand, and and we just kind of all went to his little place and we took cooking class. I'm like, that was really cool.
So cool.
Nice. Definitely agree with that.
I love that.
All right, we're going to go ahead and transition to the last section of our episode today, called Wish You Were Here. During this segment, each of the three of us is going to highlight a travel attraction from the different places that we've been. It's kind of like a little snapshot or postcard of this kind of cool event or moment that we would say, hey, this was really cool. I wish you were here. Cheryl, what would you like to do for your Wish You Were Here?
So I'm going to share about something in Rome that I had never heard about until I was there. So I don't know if other people, Ray, have you been to Rome?
Yes.
Okay.
That was actually before Tokyo. We spent 3 months in Italy.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Did you know there's a pyramid in Rome?
No, unless you mean that thing they stole from Egypt, the obelisk in the middle of one of their plazas. But no, I did not know this.
No, there's a pyramid, like a legit
like a full-on pyramid
that was built in 12 BC. Back when Egypt was just like the trendy thing
Mm.
is they built a pyramid, and the idea was like, we're going to start doing pyramids like they do in Egypt, and that's the cool thing to do. But it's in this neighborhood that I absolutely loved. I did a food tour in that neighborhood. It's called Pistachio, and it's a really fascinating neighborhood. I loved it, but it's weird because it's like on the Roman wall. So you see this like ancient wall, and then this pyramid that looks brand new. I actually made fun of it when I first saw it. I didn't know anything about it, and I thought it looked like Vegas because it was like so white and nice looking. And I was like,
interesting.
did they just like build a pyramid? I hear that's the dumbest thing. And then on this tour, they're like, that's from 12 BC. We just had it cleaned recently. That's why it looks all new. So it is old. But it's such an interesting thing to go see, and you wouldn't expect it in Rome. And it's just like an interesting piece of their history. And it's fun to see the Roman wall as well. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 there. It's called the Pyramid of Cestius, I believe it's pronounced. Cestius. And yeah, it's a really unique thing to see in Italy. So check it out.
Awesome. Okay. Another reason that I need to go to Rome is to see a pyramid, apparently.
Yeah.
All right, Ray, what would you like to do for your wish you were here?
Ooh, so many places to choose from, but I'm going to go with an experience I had in the Peace Corps. So I was in the southern state of Chiapas in the Peace Corps. Most people have never gone there because it doesn't have as much history, but it's known for its nature. Even though there are a lot of Mayan pyramids there, they just have not bothered excavating them. So one of the places we went to when we were down there, my wife was my girlfriend at the time, was a place called Cima de Cotorras. Cima's like a sinkhole, and cotorras are parakeets. So pretty much what you do is you're driving, away from the major city into this kind of arid desert area, and you kind of pull up out of nowhere, and there's just this one house, and you kind of pull up to it, and you look down, and suddenly there's a 180-meter deep sinkhole in the middle of nowhere. But what they don't tell you when you look down into the sinkhole, and I barely did because I have fear of heights, and that was terrifying. Is there's actually a tropical jungle at the bottom of it. It's in the middle of this dry desert, but because of all the humidity goes into it, it goes at the bottom. And it is a breeding ground for parakeets. There are thousands upon thousands of parakeets that go in there to sleep every night. So the way it works is you arrive the day before, and around 6 o'clock, the parakeets start coming back. So all you see are dozens of little green streaks because they just they dive bomb into the bottom of it. So you just see these little shoo, shoo, and there go all these parakeets trying to go back into their houses because they sleep down there at night. So that's step number one. Step number two is you sleep in that little house that I told you about. You wake up the next morning at around 4 a.m. and they take you rappelling down about halfway down there, and you sit on a ledge and you wait for the sun to peek over the crest. So you're down. Again, my wife has no fear of heights. She looked over the edge, and I was like holding onto the white wall for dear life. I'm like, no way I'm doing that. The sun comes out, and suddenly the noise is deafening because thousands of parakeets just woke up in the jungle down there, and they all start making noise at the same time because, hey, it's morning, and it echoes in this, essentially this tube that you're in. And suddenly they start waking up in groups of hundreds, but they don't go straight up. They start, circling. So you're sitting there on the wall of this sinkhole, and you look up and you see thousands of parakeets just circling on the way out as they fly out for the day to go and get their food and all the rest of it. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour. They do give you umbrellas because they will poop on you, as they're making their way up. But it was an amazing experience when we did that. And then me crawling up, I was like against the rock, crawling back out of there again too. That was pretty terrifying, but it was an amazing experience, and anybody has a chance to do it. It's, as far as I know, it's still not very well known. So you can probably be one of the only people there when you don't see that. Cima de Cotorras in the state of Chiapas, Mexico.
Wow.
That's so cool.
That is really cool. That is incredibly cool.
Ryan, add that to your science travel.
I know, right? Oh, boy.
How about you, Ryan?
Well, mine's not nearly so exciting, but it is scenic. So I just want to mention Deception Pass in Washington. So here in Washington State, we've got lots of water. There's Puget Sound. We've got a lot of lakes. There's all sorts of things around in Western Washington. And because it was carved out by glaciers, we've got really deep and long, narrow waterways and also some islands that are left because of that. And so Whidbey Island is one of the bigger ones. And at the south end, you can take a ferry to go to the south end of the island. But at the north end, there's actually a bridge that you can drive onto the island from. And they call that kind of that gap where the water goes through their Deception Pass. And it is gorgeous. The bridge is pretty high, but especially if you get there on a clear day, which, you know, Western Washington, that's not always, but they do exist. They do exist. It's just gorgeous to see the water moving underneath, and there's trees. There's sort of like a little mini island kind of in the middle. And I think there's a state park there, I think, that you can get out and you can kind of hike around. And it's just incredibly gorgeous and beautiful. It's not, you know, complicated. There's not a ton of, you know, amazing things to go and see and do, but it's just really, really beautiful. And even just driving across Deception Pass to get onto Whidbey Island instead of, you know, taking the ferry, it's, you know, it could be a little bit out of the way, but sometimes that's just more fun than waiting in a line for a ferry for 3 hours to just do the drive and then be able to see Deception Pass. So that's my wish you were here, is Deception Pass.
Nice.
Love it. That's a gorgeous place. There's good hiking around there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ray, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Cheryl, Ryan, it's been a pleasure.
Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
Sure. So what I do is my day job in my Superman pajamas is I run two businesses. The first one is called livelingua.com, livelingua.com. We're one of the top 3 online language schools in the world, and we're the only one who's mom and pop. So everybody else got the $10-20 million from the rich people, and me and my wife started this with me as answering the emails and her being the first Spanish teacher, and built it up from there over the last 12 years.
Nice.
And the second one I'd like to plug is my newest business, which is called Podcast Hawk. Podcast Hawk, the animal, HAWK.com. It is a service that helps you find podcasts to appear on as a guest. It's actually how I found you guys. It is a I built a database as a search engine with every podcast in iTunes and Stitcher. And you guys can go in there right now and say, hey, I'd like to appear on travel podcasts that have at least 10 episodes that have been around for at least a year, have at least 4, you know, all these different criteria.
Nice.
It'll bring you back the list, and we take care of emailing it for as well. So you kind of set up the emails, personalize all your emails, otherwise it does look like spam. So hopefully, you know, I did actually, you know, you do look into the podcast before, but that does the sending out. And if somebody replies, says, yeah, we'd love to have you on your show, we forward it to you and you're done. So it's a set and forget kind of thing. You just set it up and we keep looking for the system keeps looking for podcasts for you based on your criteria. So those are the two things, podcasthawk.com and livelingua.com.
Awesome.
That's awesome. I think you also need to share about your personal goal with podcasts.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I'm doing for podcasthawk.com is I've had my own podcast before. I have one right now for language education, but it's not interview based. I release one episode a day that's 1 to 3 minutes.
Nice.
So you can look up the Live Lingua podcast as well. I think it was top 20 for language podcasts right now. But my personal goal is I'm going to try to appear as a guest on 1,000 podcasts. So if you hear this and you're looking for a guest, I can talk about business. I can talk about travel, martial arts. I guess there are podcasts for that. I haven't even looked. But, you know, I can talk about that as well. But the reason is I'd love to learn what makes good podcasts, what makes, you know, what people are using for software for their podcast, whether they send emails to prepare you or, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I'm tracking all the podcasts I've been on. I will post the data anonymously. I'm not going to be calling out any podcasts like, you didn't do this. No, it'll be kind of aggregated data. I'm like, after 100, I'm say 30% do this, 70% do this, 20% do this. So hopefully I can help podcasters learn, right? That, you know,
Love that.
Podcasts do this and all that. So that's my personal thing. You can follow that on Facebook and Twitter. It's hashtag 1000 podcast challenge. And I'm pretty much the only person following it right now. So you're not going to find too many people. But it's relatively new. I started it I started it about 3 months ago. So
Nice.
it's not something that I've been doing for too long. I had been on podcasts before, so I cheated. I started like in the 30 range, when I started the product. So I didn't start from 0, but I'm hoping to get up to 1,000. It's going to take me 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to do this by the end of the year. So it's going to take me about 2 to 3 years, I think, to get it done.
Nice. I don't think
cool,
that's
though.
cheating, though. If
No.
you started with
I
30
started
and you're
with
going
20,
to
20 or
1,000.
30. Yeah, exactly. I got 3% into it. I still got 97%
You're
to go.
good. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we would appreciate it if y'all would follow us on social media. We are at TMWY Podcast. That's TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast. We are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us suggestions of guests we should have on, topics we should cover, and tell us the time when you accidentally rented out an entire train and where that train went. We'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. You can also call us and leave us a voicemail at 406-763-8699, or if it's easier to remember, 406-POD-TIMWY. We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think about it. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any episodes, and share about this episode on social media so other people can hear about the cool train experience and hiking and all of the crazy, amazing stuff that Ray has shared with us today.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
Ray, it was wonderful having you today. Thank you so much for making the time and working with the time change and everything to share with us.
Thanks for having me on. It was a blast.
Yay.
All right, that's all we've got for this week's episode. So until next time, remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above.